Zone 4 is from 12 feet down to the bottom. To reach these depths, you'll need a Type 2, 3, 4, or even heavier sinking lines.
The key about how deep you fish this is if the sun can reach all the way down to here. If it doesn't reach the bottom, folks, you have no oxygen. You have no germination. There's basically no plant life. You don't have any fish, no insects, there's nothing down there. That's why when you fish a lake that stratifies, if your thermocline were to build in, say at this level, everything down below that has zero oxygen. Your fish have to be above it. So they may be holding right here as deep as they can go for the oxygen and temperature. What I like in terms of line types, the Type 2 will reach there. It just takes longer to get there. A Type 3 or 4 will better fit those zones.
The key to these lines is that the entire length descends into the strike zone, rather than just the tip. What this allows you to do is keep your fly in front of the fish for the longest time possible, retrieving it across rather than up through the water column.
The insects, leeches, bugger type flies, you can fish midge larvae down there. The retrieve that you use for any of the patterns in these different zones should always match that pattern. If you're using midge larvae, you're not going to be pulling it with a fast strip. If you're using a streamer, you're not going to hand twist it and move it slow. You got to make it move quickly. So the retrieve and the fly should match up. Hey folks, we're here at Wickiup Reservoir in Southern Oregon. This is a good example of how to fish a real deep zone, what I call Zone 4, and that's anything beyond 10, 12 feet. We're actually sitting in this area right here is about 20, 25 feet. It's getting into the fall period, the water's cold, and these fish generally hold right around 20, 18, 20 feet, right in that range. So in order to get our fly down to those fish, the system I'm going to show you right now is a system that I've been using for about 3 years. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a cast here for, let's just say I'll put it out there about 50 feet. Now what I don't cast, I've got about 80 feet of line here. I'm going to wiggle my rod back and forth and lay this line right out in front of me until I get all that line out. Then I'm going to kick backwards. And as that line becomes tight, 20, 25 feet is measured this way, but to get down 20, 25 feet with your line out there, we've got to double that distance. So approximately 50 feet of line going this way will get my fly down to that zone. Then with the other 30 feet, that's what I'm going to retrieve. So as I kick and this line becomes tight, I'll stop kicking. There it's tight right now, and I'm going to count in foot-long pulls. This retrieve right here is consistent with a bugger type retrieve, 7, 8, and I'll go right on up to 30 pulls. After 30 pulls, my line will leave that area and will start up. You can go up to maybe as much as 40, at least that's what I'll try here this morning, and see if I can find these fish somewhere in that range. And if you count each pull, 22, 23, 24, as I get close to 30 pulls here, once I reach that point, I'll stop kicking. There's 30 pulls. I'll stop kicking, wiggle my rod, put the line back out there, and keep the fly down in the zone. That's the whole key here, is keeping your fly down where those fish are. Once the line gets tight again, I'll stop kicking, and now I'm going to start retrieving again. 3, 4, 5. I want to know where in my count that fish hits, because if it hits over 30, that means the fish are starting to come up or they're holding a little higher. So you can lock in on the zone or depth that you want to fish and just be systematic about it. Sometimes as the sun drops later in the afternoon, if these fish go off their bite midday, a lot of these big browns will start moving up higher in the water. So maybe you want to put out a little less line, but basically keep it out there, come back, know whereabouts in the count you are, so when the strike comes, pretty soon you'll start locking in on what depth they're at, and you can keep it there, and I'm telling you folks, you'll hook big fish. So this is the system that I use with Cortland's Type 2 line. That means it sinks approximately 2 feet in 10 seconds, and this is a good line to probe these deeper depths with. You can use sink tips, but I want to be moving parallel across these zones, not necessarily up, and I can do that with this line when I get to the end of my count. So this Type 2 line, I think you can even go a Type 3 if you want to, but it's the clear line, the 444 SL, and it's very, very effective for this style of fishing. just had to wait for it to get a little warmer, didn't you? It was down roughly 25 feet, and he hit on the 25th, 26th retrieve, which puts this fish down probably in the vicinity of about 15 to 20 feet on its way up. It's a good fish though, if we don't lose him. Guy's just a little lethargic, probably because of these water temperatures. No, I saw the net that time. All you got to do, folks, is just use foot-long poles to measure your distance down and make this fly work. We've got the seal bugger on with the orange tail here, which is one of the colors that these big browns like. Boy, every time I stick that net in the water, he doesn't want any part of that. And as we got into that 15, 20 foot range, there we go. That's when he took. He took it on the way up. Okay. This fish is around 5 pounds, big female. But not a, well, there it goes. Not a bad fish, but we couldn't hold it for you.
Fly leaders and tippets are a critical part of Denny's system for stillwater angling. Without careful choices here, all you've learned about fly lines, fly selection, and retrieves may not matter.
Okay, folks, when it comes to leaders, I think one of the most misunderstood and probably one of the biggest problems we have on our presentation on Stillwater is a lack of knowledge in how to set up the proper leader system so it'll cast well and fish well for you. Casting, I know a lot of great casters that can't catch a fish if their life depended on it. I know a lot of guys that can't cast 20 feet to catch fish all the time. But one of the keys, regardless, is a leader that is balanced to the system that you use. You know, we're so used to fishing dry flies and getting little tiny flies and getting down to 5X and 6X and maybe 7X tippets out there. When you're fishing in lakes, you have a chance of catching some awfully big fish in double-digit size. Certainly a lot of 4 to 5, 6 pound fish are available to you. So now that we have fluorocarbon available, let me tell you the system that I prefer to use. I start with a 9-foot 2X. I like a limp leader, and that's why I use Climax. There's a lot of good leaders out there, but I prefer to use this leader 9 feet 2X, but that's not necessarily what I'm going to fish with. That's where I'm going to start. That'll go on the end of my line, and behind that, I'm going to run 3 feet of 3X fluorocarbon. How important is fluorocarbon? There's a lot of times it's not important. The sun will determine whether it's important or not. Water, cloudy or not, whether it's clear or off color, can help determine it. A lack of sunlight can help determine it. But if you've got a bright sun and you're using fluorocarbon, folks, I'm telling you, it makes a difference. There's sometimes you don't need it, but why be switching back and forth? These two products are not the area to skimp and cut. Use good leaders. Get good fluorocarbon. There's a knock on fluorocarbon, and I've heard a lot of guys tell me that it's not real strong with knot strengths. I think basically they're probably right in terms of its comparison to monofilament, but the main thing, there's some really good fluorocarbon leader or tippet material out there, and that's what I'm always going to have on the end of my lines. But guess what? 3X, this particular 3X is 7 pound test, and I rarely go below that. If you have to get longer because the conditions are tougher, you're just not comfortable with casting the line out there and you think that it's going to affect your success, you want to go longer, I'm not changing this whole system. All I'll do is add 3 more feet of fluorocarbon and go to 4X, and I'll get out to 15 feet. The key to remember on any lake you fish, always match leader length tippet size, fly size, all of that has to be matched with the conditions that you face. Remember I mentioned at the beginning, the sky, is it sunny or off color? If it's cloudy, that makes a difference. The water, is it clear or off color? Is the water flat or choppy? Are we dealing with warm or cold temperatures? And what is the depth of the lake that you're fishing and the water that you're fishing? Those factors dictate the behavior of the fish. All we have to do is adjust our tackle and our presentation techniques to those conditions as well. That's what's going to determine how successful you are. So when it comes to these type of things, you know what attracts the fish to your fly? Movement, motion. You get that by the way the fly's tied, the retrieve you use, and the other one, a lot of people don't think about this one, has to do with the knot that you use, that you tie it with. I used to use an improved clinch for many, many years, 25, 28 years. Now I use a loop knot that allows our fly to get free movement in the water. And I think that's really, really critical. So the basic thing I'm thinking of right now is to put on a system that will work no matter where I go, and I don't have to change it. So that's what I go with. I start with a 9-foot 2X, add 3 feet of 3X, and I rarely ever let it get below 12 feet. 12 to 15 feet are most of the tippet. And you got to remember, what do they see next to your fly? Your tippet. A lot of ways to do this, folks. There's no one way to do it. There's a lot of ways to do it. But this system I find very effective no matter what country, what state, what area of the country that I'm fishing. It's the same system everywhere I go. It'll work for me and it'll work for you. So let me show you how I tie that loop knot. All right, you start, folks, with a loop knot with an overhand knot. Make it about this far from the end of your leader. You don't need to hold on to it afterward. Just take the end of your leader between your thumb and index finger. Take the fly you're going to tie on, and I was always taught to go up to the bottom of this. And you bring it down. Now this is 3X with a size 10 fly. Let the fly hang directly below this little loop right here. Grab it with your left hand like so. Then with the tag end, I'm going to push it through away towards you like this. I'll grab it with my teeth, pull it through. Now I've gone through away. The next step is to come over the leader toward me twice, over once, over and under twice, and it'll look like this. I'll hold the line in my hand, go over once, go over twice. When I do that, you see the little V right here in the middle of the circle? I'm going to come through with the tag in now toward me, through that V, which takes you through the circle. I'll hold it with my teeth and I push my hands away until you can't see this loop anymore. Now you see there's a little loop right there. Now I'll take the fly and the leader, pull them in opposite directions, and I hear a little popping sound, and we've come up with this little tiny loop right here for your fly to move freely. You could make it as big as this if you wanted to, and it'll still work. The main thing is the knot's 100%. My fly's free to move on the end, and I'm telling you, that's a part of presentation that's going to catch a lot more fish for you. The more free you have that fly moving and breathing in the water, the more fish you're going to attract. Hey folks, when we think about presentation, there's 3 ways to fish a lake. You can do it out of a boat, you can do it out of a pontoon boat or a belly boat, or you can wade like this. If you're gonna wade, here's some of the key things you gotta think about when it comes to fishing lakes. Just remember, the most sensitive time in shallow water is early and late in the day, and especially early in the day, because that's where the big fish that you want to catch are gonna come into, because they'll use the cover of a lack of sun to come into these shallow areas. This time of the day it's a little more difficult unless we have some kind of ripple like we have here in the backdrop. But when you're fishing a lake from shore, the presentation aspect, let's take a look first at what lines can we use when we're fishing from shore. There's really, I only find 2 of them that are effective, the floating line or the intermediate, because I'm not looking at depth now. And one of the most common mistakes I see guys do is they're going to want to wade out there and cast to the middle because they assume that all the fish they want to catch, at least the big ones, are out in the middle. Those big fish, folks, are going to be right in here. So when you're wading shoreline, one of the things to remember, never take up residency in a spot where fish cruise. How do you know they're cruising in your lane? They're usually going to be in shallow water. So sometimes it's better to fish on land, fishing the shallow water here first, and be very, very alert to what you see going on in shallow water. Just remember this, trout, when they enter this shallow water zone, they are extremely, extremely sensitive to movement, noise, and predators. So they're always on alert. They're waiting for anything that could mean danger to them, and they'll zip out into deep water where there's cover. So when you're fishing in shallow water, how you move and the way you move in the water can have a lot to do with what we're going to do in here in terms of presentation. So we don't want to make a lot of noise. Just a tip that I learned a long time ago: when you guys put that fly in the water, don't be moving while you're retrieving. Always fish from a standard position, whether you're in a boat or you're waiting from shore, because that'll affect your presentation out there, and you create bows in your line as well as slack if you're moving and retrieving. So fish from a standard position. Look, be alert to what's going on around you so you're not spooking fish. And remember, this is where they want to be early, because this is where big fish feed. All fish have to come to shallow water to feed, because that's where the food is. And if you're out here, sometimes the fish are going to be behind you. So fish this part first, then extend your cast out. And just work very carefully when you're in the shallow water. Next thing, we'll cover what you have to do from a pontoon boat and a belly boat next. Okay, the second way of fishing a lake, folks, has to do with a pontoon boat or a belly boat. And the big advantage to fishing out of these type of craft is that we have mobility. We can move. And a lot of times, when I want to work a shallow shoreline area, I'm always going to be casting in. I can be kicking and moving as I cast in this manner. I can be shooting while I'm working the shoreline, always casting across and moving very slowly. Another advantage that we have from fishing these boats is that if the wind is blowing, you guys want to always put your back to it so you're not drifting away. See, the wind is drifting me sideways here right now, so you can kick very gently and hold yourself in one position. If you have a lake that's really a big lake and you got to cover a lot of water, then it's a little different. You need a boat with a motor and get around that way. But we have advantages to fishing out of a pontoon boat that you don't have if you're waiting on shore or whatever. Some lakes you can't get deep enough or reach enough fish by fishing from shore, so these boats offer us another advantage there. So when I'm fishing out here, I'm gonna basically be fishing at top 4, 5, 6 feet. I don't want to fish in real deep water. I want to basically fish that top zone and the second zone down. And so the lines that I would use most of the time in this boat would either be a floater, the camo, or you can use the ghost tip, even a type 2 line that gets down a little deeper. But the main advantage from this boat is that we can cover water, you can move, you don't have to worry about anchoring yourself, because if you're in a boat and you put an anchor down, you're restricted as to where you can go and you lose mobility. But we can move around here in this type of boat, and I think that's a big advantage for fishing still water. And from a presentation standpoint, you just remember that when the wind does blow, always better to cast across the wind rather than casting downwind, because trout, if there's a hatch going on or they're in that top zone, they're going to be facing into that wind. So what we want to do is we want to basically cast across the wind and show them profile. To do that in this situation, I'm going to turn around and put my back to you and show you this way. Just cast across the wind in this manner, and you can get a nice easy retrieve. Now this will be a problem if you guys choose to use floating lines, because the wind is going to cause your line to bow, and that destroys your presentation. If you fish from shore, you probably get away with that, but out here in a boat in this manner, not a good idea to use a floating line when the wind blows real heavily. Folks, we've talked about presentation fishing from a shoreline, from a float tube or pontoon boat. So let's look at the good things and the bad things about fishing out of a boat like this. If you're on a big body of water, then a boat like this with a motor is a real advantage to be able to get around. But there's some real limitations that we face when we fish out of big boats like this. If I want to move along, if I don't have an electric motor to move myself along, whereas I'm moving, I can be casting into the shoreline areas and bringing my fly back out. I can do it all with an electric motor here, so you have an advantage here. But we also sit up higher in the water, so we give a higher trajectory to the fish, which means any movement or unnecessary movement, when the water's real flat like this with a high sun, we're going to spook fish. And there's no way we can get around it. Every time I put this cast down, I run the potential of spooking fish if they're in that top zone, that top 3-4 inches down to as much as 3 or 4 feet if you're in real clear water. Now if we fish nutrient water or algae water, we can get by with it, but the real advantage out of fishing in a boat like this is your mobility. Other than that, I don't see a lot of big advantage. Of course, the weather, you got to take that into consideration, and that can be a real factor for you, but As far as being able to fish out of a boat like this, I can move myself around with that electric motor. But if you're in a boat that doesn't have an electric motor and all you have is a motor in the back, you're going to have to be putting an anchor down, you're going to have to be moving constantly, and every time you want to move, you got to lift that anchor, reposition, and put it down. One of the most common mistakes that we make as stillwater fly fishermen is staying in one spot too long. I don't care how many fish are there, you guys will find after a while, whatever your normal casting distance is, you put a cast out, and let's say you're throwing that out 50 feet, pretty soon those fish are going to avoid a 50-foot ring around you. They're not going to come in here, partly because I'm putting an anchor up and down, I'm catching fish, they're splashing, we drop something in the boat. All those distractions and sound, you know, noise carries very well underneath the water. We're going to move those fish out of this area, so we have to constantly move. That means if you have a boat motor, you're lifting that anchor, you're putting it back down, but you're going to have to keep doing that if you want to be over fresh fish all the time. Main thing in presentation out of a boat like this, you're probably, because we're higher in the water, we're going to have to get more distance. So short casters, you're going to have a disadvantage. We can't use that wiggle line.